Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Courageous Conversations. Well, first-ish. Our first episode with a guest, and I am so excited to have you on this journey. My guest for today is the one, the only, as far as I'm concerned anyway, Brittan Hudson. They are a community developer with the Enchanté Network. Their official title is Director of Programs, and the Enchanté Network is Canada's largest network of two LGBTQI organizations. And so that's the official LinkedIn title. I am going to give Britt the opportunity to introduce themselves to our audience. Britt, it's up to you.
Yeah, hi. Glad to be here. Yeah, whenever folks ask me to describe myself, I'm always like, I don't know. I'm a person, I drink water, I try to stay hydrated.
You're doing better than a lot of us.
Yeah. So I'm a community developer. I'm actually just about to finish my master's in theological studies and community development at U of T School of Theology. So very excited for that. Guess once I have that degree, I'll be a public theologian, which is kind of cool, but I don't know what that title really means to me just yet. Yeah, but other than that, I'm a sibling. I'm an older sibling. She carry a lot of responsibility sometimes.
All sibling. I get it.
Yeah. I'm a Trinbagonian. My parents are from the lovely Twin Islands of Trinidad and Tobago. I have Grenadian roots, Caracuan roots. I'm Caribbean. I'm a product of the Caribbean. Yeah, I was born in Montreal, but and Montreal also a very deep part of my heart, but raised in the greater Toronto area, called Malton home. Even though I don't live there anymore. Yeah, I am a human being.
Well, I'm glad you're human and not AI. We're getting into sketchy territory in that respect, so you could be AI.
Yeah. No, that's you're valid on that one. Truly, I did an Apple Vision demo yesterday. It was very exciting. One of the cool things about Apple Vision is that you could do video calls, and they basically make a version of yourself. So if I do a video call, I'll see you as a real human being, but you'll see my computerized version of myself.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
No, I'm not ready for that.
I'm not ready for that. The next time we do this interview, I might just have the whole headset thing and you'll just see my mouth moving and it'll look like me, but it's just...
I'm not sure I'm ready for
that. Coming.
Okay, I will work to be prepared for that. So I'm going to thank you on here too, because when I thought of this podcast, and I was like, who do I want my first official guest to be? It was you. It wasn't even a doubt in my mind as to who do I want to sit down for the first conversation. I'm like, I told my mom I was doing the podcast. She's like, who's your guest? I was like, Brittan. And she's like, who? I was like, from the Enchanté Network. I met them through an interview, but they're who I want to sit down with for the first call. And I was like, okay, you do you. And so here we are. So thank you for saying yes.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
So I guess the first question I'm going to ask you, for those who aren't watching our recording and our podcast, Brittan is Black, and so am I. And so Brittan, you're also queer.
Yeah.
And so as a black, not a part-time thing, you don't clock in.
No. I've tried.
As someone who's also queer, but also black, I feel like those are two identities that sometimes people don't think would ever mesh or ever come together. And because if we think of the black communities, we have this idea of sometimes being this anti-queer space. And then if we think of the queer community, it's typically shown as being not so much welcoming to racialized people. So then when you embody both these identities and you have to live in both these spaces, it's walking sometimes a very thin line or tightrope. So how do you do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I've experienced that growing up. There's this, I grew up in a very conservative, I shouldn't say very conservative. I don't want to paint my parents as conservative people because they're not very conservative. But the church that we grew up in is very conservative in many ways. It's like we had drums, so maybe that didn't make us as conservative as some conservative churches could be. Every once in a while they'd bring out a praise dancer and they like, move their little wand around. So maybe that's not as conservative as some people. Like I'll just paint the picture for folks that are like that really know what conservative churches really look like. But we were raised Seventh-day Adventists. So if that means anything to anyone, then you get the gist of what I mean by that. While being raised Seventh-day Adventists, we were raised Seventh-day Adventists. I was raised Seventh-day Adventist in the Greater Toronto area, which is just like this bubble of Black. It was just Blackness. Like I only thought of Adventism as Black for many years in my life. There wasn't much white connection to it that I saw, unless you had to step outside of your bubble in order to have that experience. So my understanding of Blackness was really molded in that environment. And that meant that like the religious connection to it really made it that if you were Black, then you went to church. If you were Black, then you believed XYZ. And if you were Black, then it was very clear that queerness was not something that we did. That was something that white people did. Those white liberal folks did in like the downtown core. That's what
the people over
did.
there. People over there.
Yeah, the people over there did that. And while that was still a true narrative for me, at the same time, I still existed outside of my like family unit. Well, even within my family unit. My parents are both Adventists, but not all of their siblings are Adventists. Not all of my cousins are Adventists. So there's still this tension. I think everyone exists with that. Even if you're not queer, you still live with this tension of like this was true for my family, but it wasn't true for my cousins. I had cousins that didn't have the same religious persuasion, that were Catholic or didn't go to church, or like, so there's still this diversity. And I think Black people live with that diversity within our communities, and we don't call it diversity. We don't call it, oh, there's different ways of being Black, and we recognize that. And there's different ways that Black people exist in the world and things that Black people believe and all that stuff. We don't all do the same thing, but we just don't call it that. We just kind of, it's the tension of it all, and we exist. So I think I lived with that tension, but queerness was never something that was a tension within my, like, queerness as like, is this something that other Black people do? That was never a tension, because as soon as queerness entered the community, it was automatically pushed out. That was one thing that I saw. Like, Black people would not unify for a lot of things. People would be, arguing about whose jollof is better. Is it chicken curry or curry chicken?
There for a second. It's Nigerian. The answer is Nigerian, Brit. Not even a question or a doubt.
My godparents are Ghanaians. I won't get into it.
You can plead the fifth.
I will plead the fifth, because if they hear this, they'll be upset. But yeah, like that. There's this. We'll unify on. We won't unify on many things, but we'll unify when it comes to gender and sexuality. That's what I saw in my existence. And that is, I remember as a kid, I was at church and I saw this guy who came to the church. He stood out because he looked different, well-dressed, and he had this white guy with him. That's another thing too. And he sat with a family that went to our church. And I remember just wondering, like, who is he? Like, what is this? Like, what is so different about this guy? And only later on to realize that he was a son of one of the families at the church. And I never knew about him. I didn't know he was a part of that family unit because he was gay. And the white guy he was with was his partner. And they both came to the church that day. I guess it was like the holidays or something. So they came with their family. But that was like, you don't talk about the queer person in your family. That person just goes away. And that was still true for like other things in my life. I always saw that as like a trend. If there was someone queer in your family, you didn't talk about them. They were kind of outside of that unit because they didn't fit. There was one thing we could unify on. We can unify on, like, this person does not fit within this family unit because they've gone against what we perceive as normal and right and just. So they're pushed out. Yeah, so I think like we make lots of room for diversity within our Blackness. Even in like some of the way that we like as Black people present masculine or feminine, I think we make room for some of those things. But when it comes to specifically sexuality, and I think like maybe more extreme versions of gender, those ones are where we draw like a very distinct line. Predominantly, I think within Western colonialized Black communities, and I'm speaking more of like within the diaspora. I think we do have this way of like saying like this is what it means to be Black, and this is what you need to do. Don't Queerness is always the easy one to get pushed out.
Absolutely. So for you, when you realized that you were queer and you were coming into that identity for yourself, did you find a struggle within yourself, or was it something you were easily able to step into?
Yeah, it definitely was a struggle because the narrative that I was hearing was that it was always wrong. There was no question within the way that I was raised. It was always like, I remember when same-sex marriage became legalized. I'll never forget that moment when it became legalized and going to church one day and seeing the pastor get up on the pulpit and just like making it very clear that the church was not going to participate in this new piece of legality. Like we're not for this. I remember that. And I remember as a kid, like I was a kid, I don't think I was even at puberty yet. So I was really small and I wasn't really thinking about all that stuff. But I remember like the tension and like feeling like, this is weird. Why is this the thing that we're like, why is this being mentioned right now? So I always knew it was wrong. Or I knew that they thought it was wrong. But I also knew who I was in in a way. Like I before puberty, I remember like my parents never really, well, maybe they were. But they like I would wear basketball shorts and like I would steal my dad's t-shirts and wear those. Like he had this t-shirt with like it was a Trinidad Guardian newspaper. They made it into it like one of their first prints into a t-shirt. It was super cool. I don't think he still has it yet, but like I'm obsessed with the Guardian. But yeah, like so that was guess that was the beginning stages of it all. But I would wear those shirts. I'd go in his closet, take his t-shirts, and I would like put on my basketball shorts and carry my basketball and go to school. And that was like my uniform for my whole elementary school existence. Unless
Okay.
my mom had another way. She could persuade me to wear something else, then like that was gonna happen. But most of the time, it was that, especially in the summer. And yeah, like so that was normal for me and no one pushed against it because I was just a kid and that's just what it is. But I mean when puberty started, I think that's when it started to like click in that I wasn't being treated like the other kids. Like I had a lot of boyfriends and those boys were no longer wanting to be my friend because we're all hitting puberty and everyone's like liking people and I don't fit within that anymore. And I'm like, hey, but you're my friend. We like the same things. Those girls don't like what I want to do. They don't want to play sports. They don't want to rough and tumble. Like you all want to do that. I want to do that. Let's do that. So I saw that separation happening during puberty. I saw the way my body was changing and how I felt really uncomfortable with that. And how it was changing how I was being perceived in the world. Like, I remember going skiing. And my mom always made sure I had like feminine things that kind of give a touch of like it's a girl. But for still, I saw like the way society perceived me and the way that I was like trying to present myself was very different.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know, not many Black kids, I guess, like we're trying to break the mold of what Black people do or whatever. I realize now it wasn't normal for a bunch of Black kids from Malton, or Black and brown kids from Malton, to go skiing for a month.
Absolutely not. No. No, Brett.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, that wasn't normal, but that's what we did. Like our school
Hey.
put us into, we had a skiing program and we would go skiing. I
Hey.
feel like it was for a month. We would spend like at least like 2 days out of a week. We would go in March, go to a ski hill somewhere up north, and we would ski all day. Like my mom would cover our face with Vaseline and we would go skiing. And I remember going skiing and always, every single time we would do our lessons, every single time without a fail, dude would like always say like, okay, come here, little boy. And at one point I was just like, whatever. my mom could put me in this, like I was wearing that time when he was doing that, like I was wearing this like had this pink flowered jacket, and I'm like, whatever, dude. Like if this is where we're going, whatever.
Let's just go. Let's get it done. Let's get it done.
Yeah, no, perception is a hell of a thing. The way people perceive you, the way you want to be perceived is one thing. But yeah, like I always knew that was not something that, especially at puberty, I think that became really clear. As a kid, when you're under the age of like 13, I think people let you kind of do what you want to do because you're a kid. They might say, oh, like, oh, you're a little girl, you shouldn't do this. But they kind of like, nah, let you do what you need to do. But I think at puberty is where folks start to draw the line, because there's certain expectations of you. Really, it's getting down to now you need to start, which was what it felt like for me at least. Now you need to start getting ready for like adulthood, which means marriage, which means like it's a lot of things you just need to start getting ready for. And in my mind, those were things that I wasn't thinking about. Like, I wasn't thinking about dating people. Like that was just not my thought in my brain as a kid. But so there was this like, yeah, I knew it wasn't okay, but I also had these slight things that were happening in my life that felt, yeah, they felt like, yeah, I don't even know what the word is. They just felt like, there's a tension here that my community is telling me that I should do, and I don't want to participate in.
Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit. You fully conceptualized your queer identity. You've realized, okay, this is who I am. This is not going to change. This is part of my identity. So when you found the queer community, what was it like for you stepping into that community as a Black individual?
Wow, okay. So I studied theology, and when I came into my queerness and I accepted my queerness, it was through a theological lens. Like that was the thing I was wrestling with. That was I had to find an answer. And really, I told God, I was like, I don't know, but I'm going to trust you in taking this leap. And so there was a couple of things that I had read. There's this organization, it doesn't exist anymore. It was called Generous Space. And it was a place for like queer Christian folks, mostly evangelical, to find community. And I had read a couple of they had a couple articles of people that sounded really similar to me in their own journey of coming out and finding acceptance. So and there were a couple classmates of mine. We had like a Christian Christian club in high school. This is how Christian I was. Even in my public school, I was going to Christian clubs. And there were a couple of folks that were in that group, and one of them came out as queer. So I reached out to them and I was like, hey, I think this is where I'm at. And they connected me with Generous Space. So fast forward now, when this all happened, I was in Alberta. So I'm just reading stuff. When I came back to Toronto, I said, okay, I need to start actually attending stuff in person. So I did. I went to a couple things. The first thing I went to was a Christmas event. It was a service where they would have a little liturgy. They'd do communion, have a little sermon, music and stuff. And then afterwards, they'd have drinks and snacks and stuff, and people would hang out and socialize. So I went. I was going with someone, but I got there first. So I went to sit down, and I get into the service. Service had already started. I was late. It's very stereotypical of me. But I get to the service and I sit down. And at this point, now I'm an Anglican, and I'd already been going to Anglican churches for about a year now. So I was really in the groove. I knew what the liturgy was. I knew what the flow was. So when I got there, I realized where I was in the service. I sat down, and it got time for us to do the peace, which is this moment where the minister tells everyone, like something about peace of God. And everyone usually would like shake hands with folks. Pre-pandemic, we all shook hands. No longer do people shake hands.
The handshake time.
Yeah, the handshake time is not happening anymore. Now people are doing peace signs to everyone. But at that point, it was pre-pandemic, so we're all like, we walk around and you shake hands with people. So I don't know anyone. And it's time to do the peace. I see there's someone sitting like next to me, like a couple of seats away, and they're alone. Or I perceive them to be alone. So I turn to them, I'm like, I'm never a stranger anywhere I go. If I choose to be here, I'm going to take up space and be who I am. So I go to that person to shake their hand, getting a little like AC vibes. I turn a couple other people. Like no one really approaches me. I approach other people. And that continues to happen. Peace finishes, go through the service. The service is done. and I'm still waiting for the person I'm supposed to go to this event with. So I'm by myself. But I look around and I don't see anyone like me. And like, not even like a racialized body. It's just me. And so I'm looking around and I'm like, okay, well, I want to chill here for a little bit, especially because I'm still waiting for the person that I was supposed to be here with. So I grab a drink and I see a crowd of people, these like pockets. Now everyone's forming. I realize the person that was sitting next to me that was really hesitant is now in a group of people and seems like they know people. I'm like, whoa, this person actually knows people. I'm thinking maybe this is their first time. They're like coming into their queerness. They're vulnerable. Maybe they feel alone and they're shy. So that's why they didn't want to interact with me during the service. But here they are being giddy with people in a crowd. I'm like, wait, this person is not a stranger. Like, they are good. So I say, okay, I knew of a couple people. I'm like, I'm going to walk into the crowd. I'll just, make myself comfortable. So I walk in, and every single time I try and take a step more into this circle, the circle gets smaller and smaller. It's almost like it's trying to keep me out of the circle. And that happened after a while. The person I came there with, they came where I was supposed to meet up with, they came and we got this fight. We sat down together. No one came up to us to talk to us. It was literally like we were by ourselves. And we're both Black. There's no other Black people there. It's just white people, really. And they're all just being white people. Like, the wild part is that like white people could be really marginalized within mainstream society. And when they have an opportunity to congregate and marginalize other people, they will do it. They will always choose themselves over any other group. And so they did. Like, they just didn't include us. It was wild to watch, especially in a place that is supposed to be about creating a safe space for folks who have been pushed out of their faith communities. So like that was like not a one-off experience. That kept on being an experience within places that I would go to. I found that I would go to places and I would find like there weren't other Black people within those spaces, and I would be very much alone. And what came with that was like a lot of assumptions about what I should do or what I would have had experience in. Like, folks would assume things that I was like, why would you assume this? Like, about me as a person. I would find, like, I talked about that story about me skiing. Like, that's something that I haven't done in a while, but I really loved that part of my life. And just bringing something like that up was always like a shock. That was like if I want to stir up a crowd, I know I can mention that, like, I know how to ski, and people be like, gasp, like, how did you learn to do this? And that's just like they just can't see it in like in their mind that a Black person would take up an activity like that. But also, if I want to do that to Black people, if I go in a crowd of Black people and I mention it, sometimes they're like, gasp, like, why would you do that? Participate in this activity. But yeah, it's not easy. I think there's not a lot of spaces. And I say this as someone that's like, I live in Toronto. Like, there's lots of Black people here. If you want, the shock for me when I left Ontario was that wasn't the experience for everybody else. When I moved to central Alberta, I was like, whoa, I can't get like Caribbean food. Like, no. There's no yam being sold in the grocery store. Like, what is happening?
No, like, you gotta go to a special part of Edmonton to find that.
Yeah, and I was living near Lacombe. So I was living in Lacombe.
No, you were not.
So it wasn't happening. And those were a shock for me, always growing up in metropolitan, but even going to other metropolitans in Canada, realizing that like you could be in a huge city like Vancouver, and when you see Black people, you do a knee jerk, like, what? Like, I haven't seen you, friend, in a long time. It's like, where do you live?
Like instant bestie.
Yeah. Or the other piece that was a shocker for me, like in Toronto, you take for granted that there's so many Black people that you exist with, and there's so many different places that Black people could exist. Like, we talked about, like, I don't know if it was before or after, we talked about like the anime thing and like Black people not being, the people being shocked that Black people could be in anime, or not being that. In Toronto, I grew up with so many different types of Black people that were into anime, and you were like, okay, choice for Black. There was a group of Black people that were very into that, and that was their thing. They loved it. I grew up listening to a lot of like indie rock, and I had Black friends that listened to indie rock, and that was like our thing. There's lots of different Black pockets that you could find your own, you choose your own adventure if you live in like what I grew up with. And then I moved to Alberta, and like you had to like if you're Black, you have to listen to this type of music, and you're almost like cosplay.
Yeah.
You just felt like cosplay. I'm like, no, I don't do that. Like, I don't do
you
those
have to
things.
be a specific kind of Black.
Yeah, super presentable. And the other part that I found was surreal to me was now you don't want to seem like you're like if two or more Black people are together, now it seems like we're conspiring together. Like now we are like we're doing something wicked comes this way. Like once you see a bunch of Black people having a conversation, and it's something that happens, I think, across the country, but for sure when there's less of us, then it becomes more awkward and weird. Yeah, I don't know how I've got on that tangent, but
it's an experience. It's an experience. So as someone who has like similar experiences to you, so grew up in Toronto when my family first moved to Canada, and then we grew up in Toronto, like Kipling and Steeles was where I call my formative years.
Yeah,
and then my parents moved me to Oakville.
Yeah,
and I had my first mental breakdown.
Yeah,
because I was like, where are they? What do you expect me to do? So in elementary school, my family was one of two Black families. And I thought, okay, this is the smallest, most not diverse place my parents are going to move me to. It was fine. Then Oakville began to expand. Black people were coming in. By the time I got to high school, they were busing in different races to make sure our basketball team was where it needed to be. So we were fine. And then my parents moved me to Alberta. And so when they did that, we moved to St. Albert, which was like the Alberta version of Oakville. And I was like, no, you can't do this to me. And they were not none. On the first day of grade 12, there were three other Black kids. We found ourselves. We met high school. And it was like, okay, this is you, this is me, this is where we are. If anything happens, you need to have my back, kind of thing. And so much so that there was one guy who was in my class, in my social studies style course. And we had a group chat. And so that was, if things were going to be awkward, you knew not to go to class that day.
Wow.
And he did me not a solid. And I was very angry one day that he forgot to text, because it was the day we were watching a movie that was talking about race and racism, and I didn't get the text. So I went to class that day. And we were watching a movie, and then the teacher at that time asked, so what was it like for you to know about your family in the slave trade? And I'm sitting there, I was like, what family? Clearly not. So like my entire class turns around to look at me. And they're like, so how did you survive the ghetto to get here? And I'm looking again. I was like, who are you? Do you know who I am?
Wow.
Yeah. And so I sat there, and then I texted the guy, and I was like, do you know what happened in class today? He's like, you didn't get the text. I was like, so you knew this was happening today. He's like, oh yeah, it was me. We were told, someone managed to know what was going to be taught that day and said, don't go to class. I thought they texted you too. And so it became this, like, when you know you're one of a small minority, you group together. But then the rest of them are looking at you like, well, together, you're up to something, and you have to know everything. And I was like, and then you become the Black voice. And I was like, my family wasn't connected to the slave trade. Yes, I grew up in Kipling and Steeles, and that was considered ghetto, but I wasn't of that life. Like, it was not a generational situation. I can't speak for children who have grown up within the social services systems, whose parents have been. I don't know that life. So the entire class was looking at me to speak on this experience, and I was like, I can tell you Nigeria-esque, but I can tell you Oakville better than I can tell you this.
Yeah.
And so it was a very weird moment where it's like I'm supposed to identify and represent a large community that I knew was very diverse, because Nigerian Black is very different than Caribbean Black. Even if we're just talking that state, much less like if you're into pop culture, this kind of music, like it's such a diverse community within the Black community. But if you're not part of it, you're what? You're this identity, this sole media representation is what you're supposed to be. And then when you're not it, it's like, well, who are you? Who are you? What are you?
Yeah.
What are you? What are you?
Yeah, it's reminding me of I saw it was happening like the other day, or it was maybe last year. Tyla had gotten the Afrobeats award at the Grammys, and she was like, "I don't do Afrobeats. This is not my genre," and basically like calling them out on like, you need to have a better understanding of what African music genres are, because she just amapiano, and that's like that's her. It's very different. And I think there's like this way, that's why I mentioned in the top, like there's this perception of Blackness. I think Black people in the West do a really bad job of doing it. And many times, like when diaspora communities come into places like North America, we kind of buy into it, where there's this assumption that Black people are just this. And what Black people are is literally just America. And we are all African American, and we all do the same thing, and we all like, and I'm like, no, there's unique differences within that. Absolutely. Like even like when folks talk about Black Canadians, they tend to talk about Toronto, and they tend to talk about Caribbean. And I think that does this disservice in the reality that Black people have been in Canada for much longer than when Black Caribbeans in the 70s and maybe even 60s started coming to Canada through what predominantly was like nanny services. It was basically like
the au pair situation.
Yeah. So there's this, and it's ignorance, and it's anti-Black, and it's in the way that we tell these stories. When we tell these stories and we just assume that Black people are just this. So when I meet a Black person, I'm assuming they're Jamaican, because majority of the Black people I've met in Toronto are Jamaican. It's like, well, no, we're not. Yeah, I think there's like Black history is so diverse, particularly in places like Canada. Like, how many of those folks in that class that you attended in Alberta, in St. Albert, know that they're one of the earliest like Black settlement communities actually happened in Alberta? Like Alberta, it was places in Vancouver, like those had rich Black histories and Black communities that were literally run out from surviving in those places because of anti-Black racism. So yeah, I think there's just like this miss, and we kind of paint ourselves with this like one brush. And I think sometimes as a kid from immigrant parents, my parents did a really good job of like honing in and saying like, yes, you're Black and you're Canadian because that's what your passport says, but recognize that you have a history beyond that. Like,
absolutely,
don't buy into just saying, oh, I'm just going to be just like a Black American because that's what everyone thinks I should be, or like, I'm not that. And I appreciate all that, Black Americans have given to the culture. It's great, but there's so much more to be Black, and there's so much diversity in that. Yeah.
So speaking of the fact that there's so much diversity in the existence of Black people and our Black identity, you have fully come into yourself as who Brittan Hudson is. So what was it that helped you fully embody all aspects of your identity to present yourself 100% authentically as you do today?
I think a part of it was moving to Trinidad, to be completely honest. So when I was 18, when I was 18, I went to Trinidad to live there for about 3 years, and I started university there. I just like talked to my little brother about it the other day because he's at the same age that I was when I was making that decision. He's 17, he's looking at his applications, and he's applying to a bunch of schools. And I'm like, yeah, dude, I applied to multiple. So don't be like me, because I literally said, I want to move to Trinidad. I want to go to universities. So I literally applied to one school in Trinidad. That is such a bad idea but I applied to one school and I said, I'm going. And I did. I think it was so healing for me to do that. And there was like, when I went to Trinidad, I remember like just being Like I got my first migraine at my high school graduation because I was just so over it. Like all the stress just like hit me. And just for me to go, I went straight to bed after that graduation. I was just done. And I was really struggling because, like, similar to what you were saying, and like going to Oakville or going to St. Albert, like my parents moved us out of Malton. They moved us into Heart Lake, which now is a very different place in Brampton. Like, it's a very different place now. But when I got there, it was predominantly white. And immigration like changes were starting to happen. Like now it's a very much more predominantly a brown community. But I lived on this side of like close, like bordering Caledon. Anybody knows what Caledon's even changed too when I was a kid growing up there. But I went from a place like in Malton where you were like where was predominantly Black. All your neighbors, you knew them. Like you called everyone auntie and uncle because this is just how the community was. And then moving to Heart Lake, where then like similar to what you were saying, like there was literally one Black boy and one Black girl in each in each class if they could have enough of those people. There was enough of us to put us in each class. Yeah, but they never made it. It was the only class that had more than 2 Black kids was the enhanced class because it was just like they couldn't separate them. So there was like 3 Black kids in that or 4 Black kids in that class, but every other class had one or one boy, one girl. And so and I saw that. I was noticing those things. I also noticed how people were calling me aggressive. There were folks that like we played on the same basketball league, so there were folks that knew me from that league, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that kid's super aggressive and rough." And I'm like, "What? I'm so fun. I'm not
like, what do you mean?
That person." But that was the assumption. So when I graduated, I really just wanted to get out. I really wanted to get out. I was tired of it all. I didn't even know what I was tired of, to be honest, but I really just needed to get out. And going to Trinidad was the first time where like I had in high school, I had Black teachers that were super supportive, and I'm really grateful for that. And that saw beyond all of the foolishness that this world brings to you and really like nurtured and like instilled like you're brilliant. And like not in like a, oh, you've met like, I don't know, like some sort of scientific genius, because I'm not good at science, but they just really wanted to make sure that you stood in all the power that your Blackness gives you in whatever way that shows up. So they really celebrated us, and I'm grateful for that. But I need to get out. So I left and I went to Trinidad. And while there was like, I went to a Christian school. So that was, but the good things of that was that it was the one time where I was no longer in tension with what it meant for me of my Blackness. There was a one moment where like the guard of what it means to be Black was brought down because I was in a place that was predominantly Black and Indian. And that was just what it was. Like in Trinidad, they don't even say Black. They'll be like African and Indian. That's literally how they separate themselves. And to also just be hearing that language where your African identity is celebrated, where your Indo identity is celebrated, where you're able to, where that, like, there's not this weird tension of like, you're exceptional because you're Black. No, you just are. You just are. And that's it. Like, it's not odd to have a classroom full of Black people or to have professors. Like, the exception was, the weird part was to have a white teacher. That was strange. And we did have white teachers at times. There were, like, it was a university, so there's teachers from all over the country. But Blackness was, your African identity was celebrated in all of its glory. And that was such a blessing for me. It was a moment where I really was able to take off that like burden. And then also the other piece was just the way that we told our stories. I took a class that was on African, or it was on Caribbean history, and I thought I knew everything. I was like, I'm a know-it-all. I was like, this is gonna be easy, breezy class for me. I remember every class I left. Yeah, I was totally that kid. But every class I left, and my jaw was always on the floor because I never heard our history through our lens. And I never heard it told in a way where it was so, there was no mixing words. There was no mixing words. It was very unapologetic. And it was just that was healing for me. That was really healing for me, having a clear sense of who I was, and also a clear sense of who I was as someone who's a descendant of slave, recognizing that we are not victims. We are everything that we have today. We fought like hell for it. It wasn't given to us. Like telling the stories of like hearing the stories of like the Maroons in Jamaica, just burning down fields and saying, you
like
know
straight
what?
chaos.
Like, straight chaos. Yeah, they're like, we are not going to be, we're not going to be subjected by this anymore. We are going to live our lives with our traditional ways, our traditional practices. We're going to honor all of those things. And choosing that is amazing. Even hearing about like the Haitian Revolution, like these were not people that just said, you know, I'm going to let you do what you want or use your systems as a tool to like get what I want. No, they said we're human beings and we deserve to be seen and heard and to live our lives as we should. And they took that. That is something that I don't think I would have been able to accept or embrace unless I was in that environment. And so there was things that I think there were things I had to get into check. Once I finished high school and I was just like starting to really realize, damn, because even in high school, like there was some Black kids and those Black kids were really leaning on like we all had, it was like a group thing. Like we all had to be the same. So one time I was starting to feel a tension, like where folks would tell me that if one time this girl heard me listening to like Metric, which is like one of my favorite bands. It was coming through my headphones, which is not a good sign of how good my hearing is now. But it was coming through my little itty bitty headphones. And she's like, what are you listening to? I remember feeling ashamed. And feeling ashamed because I felt like I was dishonoring my Blackness. And that was the experience I was having in Ontario. And then I moved to Trinidad and I'm meeting like these like punk Black Trini kids who are wearing like the colored skinny jeans and like going really dark with their eyeliner. And they're like, yeah, rocking on. And this is in Trinidad. Like this myth of like, oh, Black people only do this, like that wasn't happening. Or even around the same time, like I was hearing, and this is like a lot of things in music. Music is a huge part of like my life, but I was in like soca music. But I was trying to realize soca music has this techno vibe going on in certain streams of soca music. It's like, whoa, these are the artists that I really like, and they're teaming up with these. And this is still soca music, and people are in the fet going at it, and it's soca music, and no one's saying, "Oh, that's white people music." Because it's not white people music, like it's not. But those were things that I needed to like wrestle with in an environment where people would look at me weird if I said Black people don't do this. They'd be like, "What do you mean Black people don't do this? How could you tell us that we? What do you mean? This is my skin. This is not. This is not what's how my brain is programmed."
Yeah.
Just going beyond that was healing for me. And it set me up that after Trinidad, I directly went to Alberta. I don't think I could have survived Alberta if I didn't reinforce the celebration of my Blackness in Trinidad. If I wasn't told that you're beautiful because you're Black.
Yeah.
That you are like, there's not one way to be Black. And you can be who you are. If I didn't have those experiences, I don't think I could have existed in Alberta in the way that I did, or survived Lacombe truly. And yeah, just because it wouldn't have been possible. I would have gone to Alberta and I would have been shocked, which I was still. Like it was a shock to go from a place where you were no longer the minority, and then going back to being an extreme minority, which I never had experienced, because even in Toronto, you don't experience that in the same way. There was no pocket to find. Except when we intentionally made our pocket, eventually there was a lot more Black kids coming and all that. So that helped. But yeah, I think Trinidad did something for me that I am eternally grateful for, because I was able to truly see myself and see that like it's not a question. Your Blackness is meant to be celebrated, and your Blackness is meant to be unique. But also you are a full person, and we're not going to gatekeep who you are because you're like, there's nothing wrong with that. Just be who you are and celebrate that in your Blackness, not despite of it.
I really like that sentence you just said, this, that we're not going to gatekeep who you are because you're Black. And I think it pairs into my next question for you, which is one of the last questions I have for you before I let you go. So for those who might be watching this, we might have Black folks who are watching this who are going to take inspiration from what you said. And I want to know what parting words you have for them. And then for the non-Black, non-racialized folks who are also watching this, what do you want to impart with them as well?
Yeah, so for the Black folks, like, know your history, understanding who we are, like, and then I say, like, your history from, like, know who your family is. Who's your family? What have they done? Know their stories. Like, don't build your story off of a narrative that is being told in the media or a narrative that you've assumed because of what you've heard within your life from other people, especially from people that aren't connected to you in any way. Know your history. Learn my history, knowing who I am as, like, from, like, knowing who my grandparents are, knowing who those people are. And I say that's like a luxury to, like, my family, even though our family was enslaved, they really worked hard at keeping our family unit strong and having a clear understanding of who we were, where we came from, and pointing us back to the motherland. Like, they really worked hard for that. And I think that's, like, something that I owe a great debt that they did that. So if you can, ask those questions. Like, ask your grandparents who they were, what they did. Ask those people in your life that you consider kin, like, who they were, because that impacts who you are. So yeah, really get to know who your family is, and also, like, understand what it means, understand who we were pre-contact. Black people honor diversity, and we recognize that, especially in, like, West Africa, we recognize that diversity was something that we need in order for our communities to thrive and to exist. If you're a Black person and you have West African roots, like, please understand Ubuntu, like, get to read on that, understand those principles. It's bigger than just, like, a philosophy. It's a method of governance, a method of family care. It speaks to, like, if you want to understand global warming or or climate change, or how we're going to combat it, or how we're going to make our societies better. It's a practice that we could delve into, and it could solve a lot of the challenges that we have, especially in combating individualism. I think individualism at its core, I think, this may sound controversial, but I think it is anti-Black. I think it goes against our community principles. So yeah, understand your history, like, who are your people, but also, as a larger group, like, who are we as people who are coming from the continent, people who have that connection, like, understand what our histories are, who we've been. We're not just what World Vision wants to paint us as on their garbage commercials. Like, there's a rich history there of who we were and who we are. So have that understanding and use that as your foundation to ground you. Because what you'll find, especially, like, for folks, if you're Black and you're gender diverse, that you're queer, you'll find that we were very celebrated. We were we were advisors, we were community leaders. We held there was a lot of respect within our community because of who we are, not despite of it. And it was necessary to keep our communities going. So having a really clear understanding of who we are outside of those, like, traditional myths that people tell about us, so important. Yeah. And then for the non-Black people, be aware of your bias. And, like, internally, I think a lot of Black people experience bias, and we, like, live that out by, like, putting pressures on ourselves, or saying, like, this is who you have to be. But a lot of that is externally reinforced by Black people who try and pin us down that to be this one thing because it is convenient. There was, like, this person I was listening to who was talking about, like, how some Black people tend to, like, reinforce utilitarianism and only see themselves as useful, only see themselves as valuable when they're useful to other groups.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the reflection back is also how we are only seen as useful by other groups if we can be used. So I would challenge, if you're not Black, I would challenge you to consider, like, how are the Black people in your life only useful to you? How are they, like, are they whole people? Are they just tools? Like, Black people are dynamic. I think everyone in the world is dynamic. but how are Black people only seen as one-dimensional or maybe even two-dimensional within your community? Are you giving them room to be their whole selves? Are you stereotyping them? There's so much more, but like I think that's one thing that I'm really like I try and I'm wrestling with myself. Like, how is it that how do I pin Black people down into like this one box and then say, oh, this is how you have to be, only because it's useful for me. And I think that happens even more with non-Black people who are buying into the historical narrative that Black people are products and are tools and are things to be used, rather than people to be loved and cherished and to be valued within our community.
Brittan, that was an awesome way to end this. I want to thank you so much for taking your time, for sharing your whole self with this podcast, and for going to be my first guest. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to bring you back for season 2 or for a recap episode before we end the season, so we can talk about all the things we've learned and grown on together.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Honored to be to be the first guest.
Awesome. All right. Well, I will let you go, and I will catch you later.
All right.
And thank you for being courageous and having a courageous conversation.